Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our session with Strengthening Cybersecurity, 5 key areas for SMBs to focus on in 2025. Today, we are diving into the 5 biggest priorities small to medium-sized businesses need to get right this year. This session is based on real-world trends we're seeing in the market and real attacks our clients are facing daily. Let's review those 5 topics that we're going to talk about today. Number 1 is human error and email security. Number 2 is modernizing outdated systems. Number 3 is prioritizing behavioral health and AI detection. Number 4 is disaster recovery and response training. And number 5 is smart cybersecurity investments with real ROI. Introducing us, we are IS Outsource, and we're excited to be partnered with Inky today to bring this webinar to you all. Let's face it, cybersecurity has moved from the server room to the boardroom. It's not just about blocking threats anymore. It's about building smarter, layered protection that aligns with your business and how your business operates. I'm excited to be joined by our guest today. We have Doug Costa with us. He's the VCIO and Director of Strategic Accounts at IS Outsource. And we also have Dave Beggett, the CEO of Inky. We're excited to have both of you today, and thank you for joining us. Dave will be kicking us off with the discussion today. And our first topic will be human error and email security. Take it away, Dave.
Thanks. Great to be here. Yeah, I will say that malicious email is something near and dear to my heart. At Inky, we've been working on this problem for over 10 years. And you might think that as time goes on, email security becomes less of an issue, but in fact, it's become more of an issue. Most people don't realize that email dates back to 1971. Yes, 1971. And it's had security features kind of grafted on over the years, but it's still highly problematic. It doesn't have all the authentication capabilities of a modern communication system like a Teams or a Slack. And I think a lot of us think about, can we just get rid of this and stop using email? But the reality is, I often tell people, no, it's kind of like the plumbing under Manhattan. You're sort of stuck with it. And so we'll talk a lot about, what are the challenges that make email such a problem? One stat I'm sure some of your audience have heard of is Verizon puts out an annual report about cybersecurity generally, and still more than 90% of breaches start with an email. So at Inky, we use a variety of AI and other techniques to find this stuff. We'll talk a bit about generative AI and its impact, and then we'll go into other kinds of tools. But starting off with email, Doug, I'm sure that you guys are seeing, like we are, this constant rise of complexity of attackers, not only their attacks, but also their own sophistication. Maybe talk a little bit about what you guys are seeing from the MSP side.
Yeah, absolutely. When we look at email as a threat vector, our perspective is that across the board, email is still the biggest risk factor for many of the reasons that you mentioned. It is the undisputed fact of life in terms of business communication, specifically business to business communications. There are other great tools in the marketplace, Microsoft Teams, Slack, others, but email is still how a lot of business gets done. So it just represents such a large attack surface. And then, as you mentioned, a lot of people don't think about the age of it as a service or as a protocol. So some of the security features aren't necessarily baked into it structurally. Therefore, if you're just working off of a default implementation of whatever email service it is that you rely on, it's not a matter of if you will be compromised. It's a matter of when. A big reason for that is that, as you said, the sophistication of attacks has really, really increased. We're not looking at necessarily an individual reaching out and trying to target another individual. AI is driving a lot of these campaigns, and they're driving them across enterprises where addresses and organizations are being scraped automatically and targeted campaigns are being sent out. That's why working with a tool like Inky is so important to us as a company at IS Outsource, where we take our security as the highest priority because it represents the security of our clients. And it's also something that we recommend to our clients as a really good line of defense to help provide a tool that matches and frankly, even exceeds the capabilities of those bad actors in terms of meeting them with technology that surpasses what they're trying to use maliciously.
You mentioned a few interesting things. I mean, one thing that I also tend to point out to people about email, because we're so used to it, we don't think much about it, is that email is a federated system, meaning that anybody, literally anybody, can run a Linux server and run a mail server on it and exchange mail. And that's a really good thing because it means no one controls it. There's no central authority. It's free of any sort of censorship. It's ubiquitous. So really try to think of any other communication mechanism aside from the phone where you could talk to anybody at any company in the world, right? The downside is anybody can run a mail server, right? Including bad guys. And so, we are stuck with a challenge here. And I would say, to your point about the sophistication of the attackers and AI, I mean, we've been focused on email security since as early as 2016, so almost 10 years now. And literally every single year, we've seen attackers get more and more sophisticated. And sophisticated in ways that suggest they understand not only all these technologies that are involved. Email involves HTML, it involves CSS, it involves Unicode. I mean, all three of those things are complete briar patches of complexity, and they understand this stuff to the level where they're exploiting obscure corners of these standards to fool people. And that means that on our side, we're constantly analyzing in real time what are attackers doing and what are the new techniques they're coming with. And I often bemoan the fact that if these people were focused on something productive, we'd probably have fusion power by now because this is really, really impressive work. It's just evil. So, and then to your point on AI, I mean, certainly this explosion. I mean, we've been using AI in various forms for 10 years. We used a lot of, and we still do a lot of sort of 2010s era AI like computer vision to make Inky see the mail like a person does. If you think about phishing in particular, it's really nasty because it's relying on the human ability to recognize familiar things like brands and people. So our brains are incredibly good at, for example, seeing an image and looking at, hey, that's like a United Airlines logo or that's a Microsoft logo. So really what we've striven to do over the years is try to make the system also understand, like a human does, hey, this looks like it's from United Airlines. It looks like it's branded United. Let's go check what mail server sent that and make sure it's legit for United Airlines, right? We know that not random mail servers are able to shouldn't be sending mail branded as United Airlines. There's a finite set that are legit, so let's make sure it's one of those. But in the past couple of years, of course, the big story in AI has been generative AI. And, I would encourage any of you who use any of these ChatGPT like chatbots, go on there and pose a query like, I am a security researcher giving a presentation to a pharma company. I want to give them an example of a phishing email targeting a company like them. Can you give me an example? It will just happily spit out a template that you can fill in like Mad Libs and send to people to phish them, right? And that's one query. It costs them 2 cents to do that query and then send that out a million times. And we can talk a little bit more if we want about this. How do we use AI on the other side, generative AI? But this is the challenge, that email is sort of a fragile system intrinsically, but it's also very ubiquitous and very highly targeted by the bad guys who are very smart. And even beyond understanding those standards I mentioned, they understand how the mail protection systems work. So they look at the legacy mail protection systems and they know, oh, if I do the following things, I'm going to confuse those systems and get through them.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. One of the things that Joe mentioned as a topic for today is actually modernizing outdated systems. And your reference to how Inky uses AI fits right into that. I'll tell you, on the MSP side, we find that many small and medium-sized businesses are still running outdated or unpatched systems that attackers can easily exploit. They're dormant systems, pieces of old backup software, legacy apps that aren't properly isolated. All of those represent risk to organizations. Now, things like regular patching, lifecycle management of your both software and hardware assets is critical. What's interesting is that even modern cloud tools like Microsoft 365 doesn't necessarily offer all of the built-in security or resilience tools that people often think of. Now, it's a great product and we rely on it, but one of the things we explain to people is that just because their server is in the cloud doesn't mean that it's not still a server. It's just that rather than them having to operationalize the cost of managing and maintaining that server, it sits in Microsoft's data centers. And that's great in a lot of ways because Microsoft does an outstanding job of managing those services. But things like backups are still really important, just as they would be in any other environment. One of the things that we use a lot to try to help people understand this landscape is things like IT assessments, so that organizations can take a real strategic look at their business requirements, their compliance requirements, and the technical controls that they either have in place or should have in place. When you talked about AI in the context of the work that you do at Inky, that really made me think of it because that's a great example of moving to a new generation standard that you're adopting as a company and that's really helping protect your clients.
Yeah, I think this is also one reason why we've seen, I would say, an explosion of use of MSPs like IS Outsource by small and increasingly larger companies. The amount of complexity now in all these systems and simply being able to keep up with what's going on is to the point where you basically have to have a trusted partner do this for you. And you have to have someone who that's their entire job is to be an expert on this stuff. I mean, we've talked before about, Inky can find signs of an account getting taken over, and that's great. After the fact, hey, we figured out this account got taken over. But any good MSP is going to tell their customer, you should be preventing that in the first place with multi-factor authentication. And part of what you would do in an assessment is say, okay, top 3 things you got to fix. We'll help you do it. Number 1, turn on MFA. Number 2, better email security. You probably can list off your head the next 8. That's just so important because there's so much you could do and there's so much you could learn. If you try to do this all yourself, I mean, this all we do is email security. That's all we do. It's all we've done for 10 years, really. And it's still, we're learning stuff constantly. So, I think the idea that companies can have a trusted source help them understand this and make recommendations and the fixes for them is huge. And it does explain why companies like ours, we've really shifted focus away from selling directly to companies and much more towards working with MSPs like IS Outsource, because that's where we're seeing a tremendous amount of growth and adoption by, it's not just small business anymore either. It's like bigger companies are realizing, hey, I don't want to have a department of 100 people doing this.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And as an MSP, likewise, our partnership with you and with Inky is part of what helps us be at the leading edge of security for our clients and to be that trusted partner, making recommendations that we've seen, we've used, we've vetted in our own practice and are then able to deliver at scale across our clients. You made a really interesting point about identifying the threat successfully after it's occurred. One of the things we think about a lot is how to prioritize detection in advance. And there are a couple of ways that we do that. There's behavioral training, where we encourage people to be aware and contextually aware of the risks that they're encountering. In the case of email, it's what email they're receiving or responding to or engaging with. But then we talked as well about AI detection, which helps organizations get in front of the threat. Because, as we've talked about, some of these are really, really sophisticated attacks that do a really good job of mimicking legitimate email. And to put all of that responsibility for identifying that on an end user at an organization sitting in front of their laptop is almost an impossible task. So they really are relying more and more on tools like Inky to help level the playing field and protect end users.
Yeah, the way I think about it is, especially in the remote working context, imagine someone sitting in front of their computer. They have 150 emails that they got that day. They're trying to get through them. Their kid is asking for lunch. They're distracted by everything. Even if it were perfect circumstances and there weren't distractions, it would be very hard to expect even a security professional, honestly, to recognize some of these malicious emails. So we encourage people to do phishing awareness training and general security awareness training. But we think it's important to not expect that's going to solve your problem entirely, right? I think those things are good because they train users to have a healthy paranoia of, yeah, just because you think this is from United Airlines, I wouldn't assume that. I would just go straight to their website through your browser rather than clicking on a link in the mail. That sort of training of, skepticism is, I think, really important. But to your point now, the forgeries, whether it's forgeries, we call them brand impersonations or impersonations of individuals, they're getting very, very good to the point where they're pretty indistinguishable. And one way to think about this is, if I'm a bad guy and I want you to think of Microsoft, the easiest way for me to do that is just take a real mail from Microsoft, modify it slightly, and replay it to you. It's going to look the same, right? Bits are bits. It's going to look identical. So how could you expect a person to see anything that looks wrong there? Now, maybe they can look at the email address and see, well, it doesn't look like a real Microsoft address. But even there, attackers can register new domains that sound kind of plausible, like msupdate-net.com. It's a little weird, but it doesn't sound impossible that it's Microsoft, right? It's not always easy to even look at the domain names. So, what we try to do is understand and mimic in the software what the user will see. And now with generative AI in our defensive systems, what they'll read and find malicious emails by correlating, well, what does it look like it's from? Who does it look like it's from versus what mail server sent it? Because one of the things that has been added to email security over the years is this ability for the sending mail server to digitally sign the mail that goes out. So at the least we can say, we can prove this mail came from Microsoft.com or such and such mail server. And we can know, well, these are legit for these brands. But even beyond the brand impersonation case, we're seeing, again, attackers getting wise to the things that we can detect and trying new things. So one thing we saw recently is attackers setting up Venmo accounts, and not just Venmo, but PayPal and other payment services, and sending out money requests to random people, the victims. And you would think, why would anyone pay money to some rando asking them for money? Well, here's where you get an insight into how smart these people are. They put in the memo where it's describing what the payment is for, which you would normally put dinner last night or something. They put in, you have paid $99 to Geek Squad. If this is an error, call this number. And then the recipient's like, well, I didn't pay $99 to Geek Squad. They called the number, and then the bad guys are like, well, give me your credit card information and I'll look it up. So it's credit card harvesting. What's important to realize about this is that it's a totally legitimate mail from Venmo. It's not like they're impersonating Venmo. It's really from Venmo. They're abusing the real Venmo service to send a mail that looks completely legitimate to any mail protection system that's comparing branding with the mail, because it's really Venmo. And the only possible way, really, if you think about it, the only possible way we could know this is malicious is by understanding the meaning of that memo text. And this is where our use of Gen AI comes in. Just like we've been using computer vision for nearly a decade to make Inky understand visually what the mail looks like, appears to be. Now with generative AI on the receiving side, we can make Inky understand the meaning of the words, regardless of how the attacker's written something. Historically, we had to rely on try to think of all the ways they might word something and put patterns in. Generative AI on the defensive side means that we're able to recognize meaning, regardless of how it's worded. So again, to your point, understanding what's changing in the industry and this very complex security landscape and which new tools to adopt to counter the use of this new stuff by the bad guys is really hard to do. And that's why folks like you have to help people do it.
Yeah. And these technologies, these tools, services like ours are really valuable, I think, for those organizations that don't have dedicated security teams, which, as you mentioned earlier, is a lot of businesses, because that's a lot of operational expense to recruit, train, and manage a dedicated security team. That's one of the places where we step in and augment services for clients, whether they do or don't have internal IT teams. We can step in with those specialized resources to help them think through these problems, help them roadmap solutions, and help them define and implement the appropriate technical controls. And like we've talked about, the key really is identifying threats early and having as many different ways as possible to identify and respond to those threats. Now, on the other side of that, we look at things like disaster recovery and response planning, because a cyber attack doesn't end when it's detected. It ends when the business is fully restored and the risk is mitigated. So we encourage our clients to think about disaster recovery in terms of their business priorities, what their recovery time objective is, meaning how long it can take before they have to be back up and operational, or what the recovery point objective is, meaning at what point in time must they be able to restore and recover data from. And it's one of those things where just having a policy or even just having a technical control or solution in place isn't enough. These solutions need to be tested regularly. And too often, organizations find gaps in their preparedness only when it's too late, only when a compromise has happened already. And like we talked about before, that's equally true whether an organization has an on-premise infrastructure or whether they're running in the cloud. In both cases, preparedness and planning for disaster recovery and response is critical. So when thinking about risk, when thinking about threat, organizations really do need to understand the legal, operational, financial, and I would add reputational risks to compromise, because all of those are present. And so it's really important for organizations to both know how to be proactive and then know how to respond in the case of an adverse event. And again, that reminds me of the multi-pronged approach that Inky takes on the email side, where it's about detection early and then being able to also identify email as it comes into the client environment, provide them with the tools to know how to respond behaviorally. One of the things that we like a lot is the contextual banners in Inky. And on the surface, it seems like such a simple thing to have a banner pop up on your email. But in reality, behaviorally and from a security perspective, it's so valuable for someone to know where a message is coming from, whether it looks like a legitimate sender or not. And it gives them that extra piece of information to know how to make an informed decision.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, it seems like a simple thing. We've evolved it quite a bit over the past, nearly a decade. In the beginning, we probably had 5 or 6 different messages we'd put in those banners. Now we have over 80. We also have found it's very important to manage the percentage of the yellows. We have a gray, yellow, and a red. Users typically won't see reds because those will go straight to the quarantine. But those yellows they're kind of like, whoa, slow down. Think about this before you do anything. Maybe don't go buy gift cards. But we found you got to really be disciplined and actually measure the percentage of these that you put on. Otherwise, people start ignoring them. And so we've actually done an empirical study with a university to look at, the efficacy of the banners, and they do actually empirically measurably change user behavior. And also these thresholds of too much is saturation. And then finally, I would say it's really important, and this is often something that I think frustrates end users about security products. It's important to not assume the end user knows cybersecurity jargon. So we try to think about ways to word even a simple phrase in the banner in a way that a quote unquote normal person would understand. And when you do that, actually, it makes end users, surprisingly, for a security product, really happy. We actually have a feature in the product where you can report an email. You just click a link, report this mail, and you can tell us you think we got it wrong, and you can put a comment in. But interestingly, a lot of people use that to report that we got it right, and they'll say, great job, Inky. Like they think it's actually a little octopus that they're praising that lives in their inbox. It's really kind of cute. So it's rare to see users actually like something that's security. I mean, I think most security products are burdensome, viewed that way at least. And what we found is like being really thoughtful about how we do these banners, as simple as it seems, massively changes the user perception of this capability.
And that simplicity, I think, is one of the strengths. It's very lightweight. It's very clear. It provides a lot of information in a way that's unobtrusive, and it gives users clear steps on how they can take action with the information that they've been given. So there's a lot of design and technical complexity that goes into such a streamlined user experience. And it's such a really great tool. It's one of the things that we often talk to our clients about with Inky in particular, is that very function. And again, it's making sure that that attack vector, that attack surface of an individual in their own email inbox is as well prepared and protected as possible. And you mentioned earlier those high threat emails are being handled automatically. They're going to quarantine. So again, we get into that idea of preventive and responsive security and knowing how to enable and empower end users sitting at their computer to make good decisions about their cybersecurity. And that leads me into our final topic, which is how to prioritize and manage cybersecurity investments. A lot of times people hear cybersecurity and they think it has to be expensive, or maybe it's too sophisticated for an organization like theirs, but that's not the truth. The case is that it doesn't have to be expensive, but it does need to be strategic. Dave, you talked earlier about MFA. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we would encourage everyone to do. There's low to no cost beyond making a couple of configuration changes and letting end users know what's coming and how to interact with it. But the benefits are huge from a security perspective. From there, we prioritize email protection, endpoint security, user training. All of these can exist within the context of a framework like NIST CSF to guide a roadmap for implementation of these technical controls, because the key is really to understand where to invest based on risk and both current and desired maturity level. Something you've said that has really stayed with me as we've been preparing for this is that a single security incident can cost far more than the tools that would have prevented it. And I think that's a really important observation and important message for the people listening today to understand.
Yeah, I mean, we have had partners tell me privately that we've prevented $10-20 million cost breaches. Inky sure doesn't cost $20 million. I'll tell you that. It would be great for us if it did, but it doesn't. And I think the other misconception that a lot of people have is, well, I don't have anything valuable. I'm not doing $20 million wires. Who's going to target me? And yeah, I think you alluded to this earlier. We have absolutely ironclad evidence. We see it all the time that attackers are scraping LinkedIn and they're using LinkedIn as an org chart o-matic, right? So they just get the org chart of every company and they'll even look for, hey, this guy just got a new job working for Dave. Let's send him a fake mail that looks like it's from his new boss, Dave. And we see them all the time. I mean, this is like, and not big companies because they don't care. Any company. And in fact, I think what we've seen increasingly in the last 5 years or so is I think that a lot of these guys are emphasizing softer targets. I mean, especially like education and nonprofit, where their perception is often right that there's lower budget for security and they're a softer target. So ironically, if you think you're not targeted, you might actually be more targeted than, some big company that the attacker is going to assume has 18 layers of defense. So it's very eye-opening. And I'm sure it's the same thing as for you guys with things like disaster recovery. It's very eye-opening to sort of be in the room and see 50 different kinds of nasty new fish, or for you guys to see what happens 50 times when there's a ransomware incident and have to remediate that. And sort of for us, it's building it into the product detection. For you guys, it must be trust my wisdom on this. You don't want to be the guy that we worked with last week who didn't test his backups and got ransomware, right? So, a lot of this is being smart about prioritization, but it's also taking literally several decades of learnings and distilling them down. Like MFA is a perfect example. MFA is the first thing I tell people to do. I don't even sell MFA. I don't sell authentication. I sell email security. But the first thing I say to people, you got MFA turned on? Because we'll try to detect account compromises, but it's a heck of a lot better if you just make it really, really, really difficult for people to compromise the accounts in the first place. And without MFA, you're probably going to have an employee who makes their email password their dog's name +1. They're going to get breached and their account's going to get owned. And yes, we could detect that after the fact, but who knows what's happened before we detected it, right? So, and you talked about prevention versus detection. That's the classic example. MFA is sort of the number one thing, lesson learned, I think, from the overall security. That and testing your backups are probably the two things we've collectively learned you really want to be on top of, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the way that clients or prospects often approach us. And those are some of the most painful situations for us to see as technology professionals, because people will come to us with systems that have been compromised, and they're looking to us to help them resolve that compromise. And we can step in and do that for them. But our approach is always based on strategic partnership that takes a proactive and preventive approach to those type of situations. And one of the things we tell both current clients and prospective clients is that lack of awareness about a given risk or threat does not absolve their organization from responsibility for that risk or threat. So it's really important to understand their landscape, to understand their business requirements and compliance requirements, and really think proactively about what tools, what systems, and what processes can be put in place to prevent and harden against attack, and then to be resilient against attack. Kind of as a summary, we say that effective cybersecurity should be layered, proactive, and scalable, because that allows it to support business continuity and build trust with their customers. Going back to that question of size, maybe this is a good place to kind of end this portion of the conversation, because no organization is too small to have a responsibility for the safety and security of their business data and their clients' data. Today, that is the currency of business. And we want to make sure that the organizations we work with are protected as much as possible in those ways. And Inky has been a tremendous partner to us in helping do that for our own business and our own requirements, and especially for the requirements of our clients. So really impressed with the way that Inky has continued to develop as a tool, as a service, and as a partner to us and our clients. And that spirit of innovation is really evident in the way you talk about your approach to email security.
Thank you. That warms my heart. That's the best feedback is is the feedback from happy customers. I'll leave you with one thought too. You alluded to this in the beginning, but it's not just a business issue, it's a boardroom issue now. I think that's how you put it. If you think about the history of financial controls at the board level, how much that's evolved and how strict and onerous these rules are on financial professionals in organizations. Guess what? This is happening for cybersecurity. CISOs are in boardrooms now. CISOs are going to have increasingly more personal responsibility for this stuff, in the same way that if your CFO said, yeah, I screwed up the books last month, I guess we'll just have to figure it out. Like, dude, no, that's like against the law, right? This is what's going to come with cybersecurity. It's already happening. So I don't mean to scare everyone, but I think the expectations are, you sort of alluded to, ignorance is no excuse. That's going to be reflected in legislation and, I would say, reputational risk as well.
That's a great point. In my role, I get to work with executives at a lot of our clients and really help them think through that relationship between business and technology strategy and business needs and technology solutions. And having those services available to our clients is a real differentiator that we bring to them, the ability to step in and have business first conversations about their technical needs and how all of that relates to their governance and risk and compliance needs. So we're always happy to have that conversation, and we welcome it, because that is, to us, part of being a real partner to our clients, is not to minimize it, but not just being reactive and responsive in terms of our technical controls, but really partnering with them to think through every step of their technology program in its life cycle.
100%.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Doug. And thank you, Dave, for your time today. It was excellent to learn about human error and email security, modernizing outdated systems, prioritizing behavioral health and AI detection, disaster recovery and response training, as well as smart cybersecurity investments with real ROI. I just want to say personally, on my first day at IS Outsource about 5 years ago, Inky definitely changed my behaviors on clicking on emails. I clicked one of the phishing emails that was a test, and I quickly had to take a test because of it, because I clicked that naughty link. And I now tell everyone. So I see the banners at the top, and it's a good guidance. So I really appreciate that you evolved to 80 messages to help someone like me that couldn't spell IT 5 years ago. With that said, though, cybersecurity doesn't have to be overwhelming, y'all. You don't need a huge team or a huge budget. You just need focused, paired approach, and make sure IT is aligned with your business priorities. At IS Outsource, we help small to medium-sized businesses across the country turn IT from a vulnerability into a competitive advantage. We help businesses simplify, save, and protect their IT environments especially with partners like Inky. And whether you're looking to improve your email defenses, plan disaster recovery, or evaluate AI-powered detection tools, we're here to help. You can contact us today and schedule a cybersecurity readiness review, and let's build a smarter foundation for your business. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you'll have a wonderful day.